I know you're wondering what this means about inhabiting complexity, the uncertainty of our future. What does fun have to do with this serious stuff? Well, changes in rainfall are plunging millions of people, small farmers, into uncertainty as to their future, threatening the future of food security for the planet. Like these East Africans who are playing a game about planting decisions based on rainfall probabilities, so they can explore the consequences of different planting strategies, test alternative futures without real-world consequences. But ultimately, they're going to be making better decisions in the face of rising hazards, risks, and the complexity of their future. I've spent over a decade working primarily in developing countries, where I see climate change exacerbating all kinds of vulnerabilities, threatening to set back decades of hard-won development and investment. We are simply failing to do enough fast enough. So, for the last few years, I've been working as a, forgive the pun, system dynamics duo with my husband, Pablo Suarez, and we've been intensively testing the use of hands-on experiential learning, games, to enhance the uptake of climate science, to inform, mobilize, locally driven, consultative processes to shape our future. What we're finding is that games are one of the most efficient and effective means of cultivating the kind of systems thinking that the realities of climate change are now challenging humanity to embrace. Games are actually the medium of systems. No matter how complex, games are the culture of systems. And can, in theory, any system can be distilled down to essential components, relationships, in which games define boundary conditions that we refer to as rules. Scientists and philosophers have speculated about the role of games in the history and evolution of human culture, suggesting that games may actually be the driving factor behind the development of culture. Consider, for example, that a set of Sumerian dice, dated about 5000 BC, remarkably resemble the same six-sided dice that we still use today. Dice also represent our apparently timeless struggle dealing with how to figure out probabilities. Now, the fact that dice are the earliest evidence of games tells us something about perhaps why games exist alongside other forms of culture. They help us to understand the world and survive within it. Games offer familiar structures designed to allow us to play with the unfamiliar. Play is at the root of our ability to learn. So here comes a serious bit about the fun part. Games structure play, they entice us. The challenge to win helps us perceive as fun what actually enables us to focus more intently, learn faster, and retain what we learn. Adding structure to play adds complexity. We're able to understand through play the dynamics of the system designed or caricatured within the game. Games are also what we call emergent systems. To be useful as a learning tool, the model used to represent reality, whether it's a hydrological model for flood risk or an econometric model for land use policy, will reflect this emergent complexity. What does that mean? It means the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That a game system can generate from a simple set of rules patterns of complexity that are unpredictable, sometimes surprising, and can yield a vast array of plausible combinations and outcomes what game designers call the space of possibility, and as players, we can actually experience as alternative futures. But I want to ask, do you think this current wave of gamification, using games in everything from entertainment to advertising, corporate retreats to group therapy, is this just a fad? Or maybe, is it a resurgence of some deeper impetus to explore the frontiers of new culture? By 2010, people around the world were spending collectively 3 billion hours weekly playing only online games. What if more of this focus, this deep learning, could be motivated, dedicated to solving some of the serious problems that we confront? It's time to get beyond the hype of gamification and try to understand the role of games in what may be the defining challenge of our times, how to adapt to this increasingly rapidly changing climate. Now, I'd like to take you behind the scenes with a game we developed this spring with a climate resilience lab in Kenya. In the drier parts of the country, crops are failing due to changes in the rainy season. Some years, it hasn't rained at all. This spring, I witnessed the tragedy of these farmers' fields, half-grown, withered stalks. So the Kenya Red Cross is working with communities to build resilience to climate change. This farmers' cooperative received cultivars of an improved variety of cassava. That's that enormous plant, which they're proudly displaying in the front. It's not as popular as maize, which is their traditional staple food, but they're desperate for a crop that can survive. Now, there's also a backstory. The ways in which women and girls are differently affected by climate change remains a seriously underlooked issue that may hold the key to resilience around the world. All over Africa, women produce the bulk of food for home consumption. However, climate change can aggravate existing gender asymmetries. For example, in Kenya, 90% of land is owned by men, and unequal access to things that farmers need to succeed, like credit and fertilizer, are less likely to benefit women, who very often derive less benefit, therefore, from their farm work than their male counterparts. When crops fail, no savings are available. This can have dire consequences for boys and girls, but they're different. Boys sent to the urban areas looking for work, they may be subject to falling into what their parents call evil ways, perhaps less than legal ways of earning a little bit of money. But girls are vulnerable to sexual exploitation. This is a reality of life. Now, think for a moment how heart-wrenching it is for a family of farmers facing loss of livestock, failure of crops, having to send their most precious and their last assets, their children, out to work. So Kenya Red Cross was interested in a game that could be used to open a safe space for dialogue about these often very sensitive aspects of climate change impacts in farming communities. We began with a game on planting decisions that we'd actually developed for the Rockefeller Foundation to enable Rockefeller staff to walk for a day for the space of a game in the shoes of some of the people they're trying to help. Now, it's interesting to see how the game, different variants, but the same game creates an equally powerful emotional experience, whether it's played with Rockefeller staff in New York or with a farming cooperative on the front lines of climate change in Kenya. This is the initial, what we call the stage, consternation, trying to figure out how this game system works. Now, you can see them figuring it out, resolving that apprehension and tension, and this leads to a shared experience, and that is also a key in the value of games. It engenders a collective intelligence, a common understanding. We added the element of gender differences in this game by randomly assigning fictional gender roles. Those wearing a colored bracelet play as men. Anyone with no bracelet plays as women and find themselves starting the game with fewer beans, the currency of this particular game. As things play out, as in reality, women find themselves with a smaller harvest than the fictional men. Now, at the end of the game, players were exuberant on both continents, but there may be a unique motivational ability in games to make people feel good about themselves and their shared experience interacting within this game system that transcends the simple joy of winning or losing. In Kenya, they spoke about how they felt about the gender roles, what they saw as the root causes, and discussion centered around strategies to better cope. They talked about the different implications for women and girls compared to men and boys, what these additional pressures mean for life choices. And what came out was that cassava offers hope not only for surviving drought, but for their dignity as a people with a restored prospect of success living on their land. They embraced this game, not just for the fun, but really they felt that it was a vehicle for communicating with pride and helping to replace what had become their tribe's reputation in this region of the country of destitution and degradation with a reputation for ingenuity and entrepreneurship in the face of hardship. Now, even something as complicated as rainfall index insurance, does anybody out here even know what that is? Can be readily understood through a well-designed game. Pivotal moment came for me in this World Food Program workshop 4 years ago. These Malawian farmers, I was astonished to realize, some were illiterate, some even innumerate, but they can distinguish different denominations of money on sight. They learned over the course of an afternoon to make successful choices among a selection of fairly sophisticated financial risk management instruments. As you can imagine, they were quite motivated when they found out that we went to the bank, we got bags of kwacha, the Malawian coins, and the winners were able to take the amount of their winnings home with them. Now here you can see at the bottom the options they had to choose from on these posters with the money taped on, so they can figure out how much they have to pay for each one. So let me just briefly explain what these farmers learned in the course of this afternoon. They could make choices between normal inputs, so that would be regular seeds, maybe some fertilizer, wouldn't expect a very big yield or harvest if there are good rains. Or if they want to buy better inputs, they could go to the bank and they could take out a standard loan. They'd get fertilizer before the rainy season, but they'd have to pay it back with interest at the end of the round in the game. Now, that would be whether the rains were good or bad. They'd still have to pay back that loan if their harvest failed. So the other option is to take out a protected loan. So you can see the farmer at the top who's showing his protected loan token with the umbrella symbol. Now with a protected loan, the farmer gets fertilizer before the rainy season through a loan that's insured against lack of rain. So we roll the die for the rains, that's our proxy for the weather station. If the roll of the dice indicates a lack of rain, the farmer doesn't have to repay the loan, it's insured. Now, there was, again, one more complicated option that they had to choose from, and that was a cash-protected loan with which the farmer would receive the inputs before the rainy season with a product similar to the protected loan, insured, but they would also get some cash available to cover livelihood expenses. And if the roll of the die indicated good rains, the farmer would have to pay back the cost of the fertilizer, the inputs, the premium on the loan to protect the loan, and a premium for the livelihood expenses. Now, by inhabiting the complexity of the actual insurance scheme that was being offered through World Food Program and the Malawian government and the World Bank, these farmers all figured out, 180 of them, how the system worked. They made good choices. So these are actually the epiphany, or those aha moments, realizing that their choices have paid off and comparing with each other how their investments turned out. To bring this all back home, I don't just work in developing countries. I'm very concerned about leveraging the impetus, the potential, the possibilities in this space of possibility here in Boston, too. Just on Friday, here we are on the roof of one of the buildings at BU, I ran an experiential game jam. It was designed to create unlikely collisions among artists, designers, climate scientists. I wish we'd had Christopher up there with us. We had local government agencies and civic organizations brainstorming about viable concepts for games for a new climate that can inspire, engage Metro Boston in what we can do about climate change. Working groups focused on themes like sea level rise, coastal development. If volatility is the new normal, games can offer a safe space to inhabit the complexity of these uncertainties, to explore how triggers, thresholds, time delays, cascading impacts can be expected to play out under different scenarios. Another group explored platforms to plumb the depths of our relationship with water, the means by which we experience climate change. Games are systems for creating meaning. They immerse us in the interaction with our natural and social environment. And in this kind of experiential learning, there are no bad seats. All players actively inhabit this dynamic system. As we learned in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, climate change can unify or it can marginalize people who are at the greatest risk. So there are equity issues. This goes to the root of our values as a people, our understanding of how we could operate as a culture. Climate change could well lead us to cataclysm, or it could be a catalyst. I'm opting for catalyst of a new or adaptive culture of equity for all that's responsive and inspired by this new changing climate. Finally, let's not forget about the power of games to leverage humor to trigger behavior change. Now, this group hilariously asked themselves, where does most of our water go? Think about it. Down the toilet. I think there is already a wait list for their family card game on water use efficiency with the potty humor name, Process of Elimination. But you know, since we're at UMass Boston today, a student-centered university with a service to the community purpose, it's only fitting for me to bring you back into the classroom. Different kind of classroom. Yes, that is a bust of Ho Chi Minh up on the stage. When I agreed to demonstrate a game on marine spatial planning with a group of students at Hanoi University, I understood that we were going to have about 100 students. And I had the idea that if they were really quick, maybe I could show them 2 games. Well, when 250 students showed up, I thought, with simultaneous translation, that we'd be lucky if we got through 1 demonstration. These young Vietnamese students were so excited, so engaged, so quick to learn, that we were actually able to show them 3 games before we had to break for their class. So, you know, this generation is the hope of the future. I want to close by asking, what stands between us and the socially equitable, environmentally sustainable world that we all want to live in, and that we want this vibrant new generation to inherit? I would propose that it's not an innovation gap, or a poverty gap, or even an education gap. It's actually an adaptive gap in that we have not caught up with our reality as a fundamentally interconnected, interdependent, and newly dominant species on the landscape of life on this planet. Games are uniquely suited to close this reality gap because games for a new climate tap into, stimulate, and exercise our most primal adaptive wiring. They're appealing as a way to inhabit a narrative. Remember, storytelling is at the foundation of all knowledge. While the educative, innovative, and creative purpose of play is intrinsic to the human animal, to any animal that learns and is capable of adapting to different environments, it's experienced as thrilling and fun because it also reflects the questing nature of the human soul, our innate desire to find the path through conflict, to enlarge our space of possibility, and to see what a better future might feel like. Thank you.